a notification here in a second. There we go. So now we all know. And the recording will be sent out afterwards for anybody who needs it, in case you have to hop off early or anything like that. Totally get it. I'm sure some folks will continue to join us, but we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Melanie Flores, and I'm just super excited to give you this workshop today. It's a grant writing workshop for nonprofits. A special thank you to Forefront and Susie, and all of you all here for just having me. Thank you, Emily. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. And I'm going to do my best to monitor all of that as well. All right, so just some quick things. Well, again, more people are going to be joining us. I already mentioned that. So if you could just make sure your mics are on mute, you will have a chance to come off mute to ask any questions at some point. But just in case there's any background noise, we can make sure our mics are on mute. If you have any questions, you can also use the chat box. If you don't want to speak your question out loud, we'll do our best to monitor that throughout our time together. And again, continue to feel free to introduce yourselves and say good morning in the chat. My hope is that this is an interactive experience, and we have an opportunity to get to know each other. I think that we are all experts in our own right in this room, and so we can continue to learn from each other. I never claim to be the know-all be-all, and so I'm happy to learn from you all today as well. So what we're going to be learning today, we are going to be walking away with what we hope is going to be a clear structure for a strong proposal, the different sections that you'll need, etc. Tips to help align with funder priorities for your nonprofits. We're going to talk about strategies to avoid, to make any errors or common pitfalls within this process. And you are all going to walk away with templates, tools that you can use at your nonprofits that we developed at Propel Consulting. Just very basic tools. But I always think that sometimes it's awesome to just go back to the basics because it's a reminder of the foundation that we'll need for strong grant writing. And of course, we're going to have a Q&A. So happy to answer any questions at the end or throughout the presentation. So a little bit about myself. My name is Melanie Flores, as I mentioned. I'm a development and fundraising consultant and the founder of Propel Consulting. I have been consulting for about 5 years now, but have been in the nonprofit grant space for well over 15 years. I like to say I'm older than I look, but I'm glad that I don't look as old as I am. So at Propel Consulting, we specialize in connecting nonprofits and even sometimes small businesses with funding opportunities through our grant sourcing, proposal writing, and some strategic planning. And so our commitment is always to empower organizations for sustainable impact within the communities that you serve. It is my heart to continue to work with nonprofits and organizations that are run by and for people of color, because we know that we are often just disinvested in. And so my goal is to help a little bit as I can to bridge that gap between the organizations and the funding that's out there. Personally, I was born and raised in Chicago. I've lived in the Humboldt Park community for a while, and Emily and I were talking about that earlier. I have a husband of almost 13 years now, and I'm raising 4 boys, and they're all very athletic and creative boys. So busy mom for sure, but I love it. Thank you guys so much for saying good morning and hi in the chat. I love seeing where folks are coming from. I'm so glad to see we're not all local, and to see someone from New Mexico and Canada, which is totally awesome. I was just telling Emily I want to plan a trip out to Canada. So continue to share in the chat. Oh, good question that we started off with. So Forefront is an awesome organization, and Emily, I'm sure, can answer any questions about Forefront specifically, but they're a great resource for nonprofits. And they also work with consultants to support some of the nonprofits. And so I'm a member of the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits, and that's how I was introduced to Forefront. And so that's where our relationship stemmed from. But that was a good question. Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. Another Humboldt Park native, love it. Very cool. So you continue to feel free to do that. A quick icebreaker, since we're all utilizing the chat today. I love it. Just would love to hear from you all. Just loosen up the space. To share with me your favorite vacation destination. I have a few. Growing up, my favorite place that we went to, I don't know why I call it my favorite. It's not like we went more than once, but my family did a trip when I was a kid to Aruba. It was my first time out of the country, and it was awesome. Um, but I would have to say now as an adult, I think if I asked my kids, they would say Puerto Rico. We had a trip to Puerto Rico a few years ago, and they loved it. Anywhere with ocean, I totally agree. Los Cabos, Virgin Islands. Oh, cool. I love small towns. Okay, awesome. Mexico City. Very nice. I'm loving all of this engagement. Costa Rica. Oh, I went to Costa Rica. That was an awesome one too. So hard to pick. Jamaica. I want to go there. That's definitely on my bucket list. Anywhere with a private pool. Awesome. Love the water. Okay, another Aruba here. Ireland. That's also on my bucket list. Greece and Rome are also on my bucket list. Very cool. Thank you all for so much for sharing your vacation destinations and where you're from. Yes, this session is being recorded and it will be sent out. I like that. My house when no one is home. That's a good one. I could totally resonate with that as a mom of four. It's always chaos in here. That is an awesome one. That's me right now. Everyone's at school or with grandma. Very cool. That's probably the best one. All right, cool. Now a quick poll for the chat. Since we are going to be talking about grants today, I would love to see what is your biggest challenge with grants or in the grant space. My hope is that I'll be able to address some of these in the presentation today. And if it's not already built into my presentation, I just love to know so that I can make sure to answer any questions throughout the presentation or afterwards. Awesome. And this is meant to be a refresher for beginners, for, even if you're advanced, it's always good to just relearn some of these things. So there is no wrong answer in your challenges. No, okay, awesome. Very cool. Some new folks in the room. Multi-year grants are really good. Yep. Budgets, that's always an overwhelming process. So I totally get it. Oh, not getting feedback. Yep. We can talk about that. I obviously that there's pieces of that are out of our control as writers, but totally can resonate. Okay. Ooh, finding faith-based grants is difficult. I totally know that. They do exist, but they are hard to find. Awesome. Okay. Let's see here. That's a really good one. You're used to writing research grants. I definitely can understand that. I come from an academic background, and even those sometimes can be a little bit too um just too much information for some funders, and so definitely bringing things down is important. We can talk a little bit about that. Operations grants and not just program. Yep, those exist too. We'll talk about that hopefully. Okay. This is very helpful. Feel free to keep adding things on here. And keep your answers in mind, because if I don't get to them, I would just love to have a chance to talk with them at the end in our Q&A. Again, I don't can't claim to have the answer to everything, but I'm happy to share my experiences over the years. And you all are more than welcome, excuse me, to share your experiences as well with the group, because we can all learn from each other. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started into the meat of our time together today. So we're going to talk first, just high level, the different types of grants that are out there. So some of you who are new to the grant space, this is just good information to have, so that you know a little bit about what you need to look for. So there are foundation grants. So foundation grants can provide either program or project specific funds and sometimes even general operating funds. And so those are always really great places to look for grants. Obviously, we have federal grants. Those are pretty much almost always project specific. If you are looking for a federal grant, so if you've got all the documentation that you need, there are 900 different grant programs with 26 federal agencies. And so you want to be able to understand which federal agency you should be looking for grants for. So if you are an education-based nonprofit, you would look at the Department of Education. If you're a nonprofit that does, workforce development, maybe you look at Department of Labor. And so there are different type of federal agencies you can look for if you have all that you need to apply for those types of grants. And we will talk about that in a little bit. There's obviously local, state, and city level grants and then research grants. So like, there's foundations that do research grants like the Spencer Foundation, et cetera. So these are the different types of grants that you can be looking for in your organization. There are some terms to remember, just so that you know that I'll be using throughout the presentation today, are RFP or NOFO. I tend to use RFP more often, even though they don't use that as much anymore. But it's request for proposals, and you'll see that that foundations will release RFPs, and it's their announcement to folks that, hey, we have an open award coming up, and this is what you need to apply. For me, the RFP or the notice of funding opportunity is my like go-to document that will help me understand what I need to put in the proposal. It'll help provide the outline for what they're looking for in a proposal, so that I can make sure I cross my T's, dot my I's. I go back to this document often when grant writing because I want to make sure that I've touched everything that they asked for. Most recently, I submitted a grant that they had a very specific outline of the sections that they required. They wanted the sections on, like, the top of a section needed to be a new page. And so I had to make sure I spaced it out. So it was very, very specific. And I'm happy to say that they won that grant. But that you want to make sure that you always go back to the RFP throughout your time writing the grant. So when we're talking about funder fit, you want to make sure that you are cultivating the right funder. You just don't want to, any funding opportunity that's open, you want to apply for. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're strategic in the type of funders that you are looking for to make sure that they align with the work that you're doing. And so these are some questions that you want to ask when you're looking at the foundation is what is being funded? Whether that in your organization and what they are funding, right? And make sure that there's a match there. Where is the money going? What kind of projects? How big are the grants? So some foundations and funders in general will have a database that you can access online that will show you where their money is going and how big those grants are that they are giving. This is good information to look for because when you are writing your grant, sometimes the big question is, how much do I ask for? And you may not know because they have an open, limit. And so looking at how much they funded in the past will give you an idea of what your request should be. I personally, this is not a right or wrong answer, but if it's a brand new funder that you've never applied to, I tend to lean more on the conservative end because they want to make sure that it's a safe investment. But that's something that you can look for. Again, like what's the most common grant amount that they're funding? Who has received the grant in the past? Is that organization similar to yours or are they totally different? If they're different, maybe that's not a funder you want to go for, but if they're very similar, then you're on the right track to finding the best fit. Does it fit your program needs? And so you want to make sure that the funding is going to the program that you need, but also that you have the capacity to fulfill all the things that they're requiring if you were to get this grant. You also want to know who's who. And so when you're looking at foundations, finding out who their program officers are that are leading the particular funding opportunities you're going for, keeping that contact information handy, sending out emails to them is important. We'll talk about that too, because you want to make sure that you build a cultivation strategy. So this is some of the research that you want to do when you're looking at who's the best fit for you. Good question. Typical amounts of foundation grants, if there is a typical. This can vary throughout. I have noticed over the years for foundation grants, especially if you're new, and this is a large range, but this is what I've noticed, anywhere between the $5,000 to $25,000 range tends to be a sweet spot for smaller, newer organizations. Sometimes the 50, 75, I rarely see a small nonprofit awarded anything larger until they've grown and can show data that they've been impacted and they're building relationships to have larger grants. But if you're a smaller, newer grant and you're looking at a foundation, that tends to be the range. Usually, if it's a first time grant, I usually land somewhere between the $10,000 to $25,000 as my first initial request. And again, that does depend on a lot of factors, but good question. So here's some elements that to make a grant reviewer say yes. So again, this is a continuation of our funder fit conversation, but you want to make sure that you are mission aligned with the organization. So what are their funding priorities? Is it in education? Is it in violence prevention? Is it in food security? Do you do any of those things? You want to make sure that you have a clear and compelling problem statement. You want to make sure that you also have specific and measurable goals. And then you want to have a strong program design and make sure that you have the capacity to deliver that. Sorry, everyone. I had my 4-year-old run in, but he's running right back out. All right. And then you want to make sure that you have an aligned budget. So making sure that whatever you are saying you're going to do with the funds, you actually do, and that it matches what they're looking for. You want to make sure that it's not too aggressive. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but there are pieces of the budget that if you aren't careful with can ding you in your proposal, but we will discuss that. Credibility is also really important. So you want to make sure that you can prove that you are providing impact, that you're doing the work that you're doing, that you can include testimonials, include data, satisfaction surveys, and we'll talk about that too. And you also want to make sure that your grant proposal is easy to read. So something that you also make sure there's more than one set of eyes on it. Sometimes reading it out loud, making sure that it makes sense is all really important. We are going to talk about problem statements in a few, so I will hopefully answer that question in the next slide or two. Before we get into the anatomy of the proposal and that question, I just want to quickly provide some tools for you all to start looking into different funding opportunities. There are free tools out there, so I don't have it on here, but of course we can Google. And we are going to talk a little bit about AI. You can use ChatGPT to help find grants, but they're not, and I can't stress this enough. You have to double check because I don't think I've ever asked ChatGPT to find me a grant that actually accurately was an open opportunity. They always send closed opportunities or past opportunities. It's nice because they send you organizations that maybe I haven't looked into before, but just you want to make sure you double check your work if you're going to use AI. But these 3 tools on here are great. Grants.gov is a free service that you can find if you're looking for federal grants. This is your place to go. You can use Google for foundations. If you have funding that you can spare, Foundation Directory Online is a subscription service. They're by Candid. They are a great tool to find foundations, and they provide so much data in terms of where this foundation has given before, how much they've given usually, where they're located, do they have geographic restrictions? It's a great tool. They have a monthly subscription. It's discounted for nonprofits. And from my understanding, it's flexible. So you can cancel at any time. If you only need it for a couple of months, you're not tied into a year. Which you can be with Instrumental. It's also a really great tool. I really do enjoy it, but it is a little bit more expensive. And they do kind of tie you down for a longer term. But if you're a larger organization and you have the funds, I'd recommend, doing a free trial, seeing if it works for you. But see, these are some tools that you can use to find grants. How important is work already accomplished? I believe we're talking about the proposal, and that we'll talk about that very shortly here, but it is an important piece to your proposal. All right, I hope that this answers some of the questions, but we're gonna get into now the anatomy of a proposal. So these are all the sections that you will need in a proposal for a grant opportunity. You are gonna see these sections, you'll see for foundation grants as well as federal or government grants. Some foundation grants, I just want to provide a caveat here, have a simpler application process with just questions. But I can guarantee you that these questions will touch on pieces of this anatomy. And so this is a good foundational guide for you to understand just what will be required, because at some point, any application, big or small, will require one to all of these pieces. And so the RFP will help to guide you on the outline of the proposal. And so this is, again, the foundation, but you use your RFP to get also a better understanding of the different proposal sections they'll be requiring. Okay, so the statement of need, and we talked about like the problem statement. So hopefully this answers that question. This is an important section of the application, and I tend to use the need, solution, and impact framework. So in this section, you are going to describe what is the problem. For example, if you are a education-based nonprofit, and students in your community are performing really low in school, and maybe they're not, matriculating to high school or college at the levels that they should be in comparison to other communities. That's a problem, and your nonprofit is existing to help solve that problem. And so you want to describe that challenge that your community is facing and use both data and narrative. So what are test scores? What are grades? What's the percent of students that are going from one grade to the next, retention rates, persistent rates, all of that is part of the problem that you want to include in there. If you are a food security, nonprofit, right, and there's a lot of food insecurity in your neighborhood or in your communities, or homelessness, those are all different types of problems that you exist to solve. And so you want to be able to describe that problem and use qualitative and quantitative information to share that. And so you can use public data, you can use your own data, and also storytelling. Solution is, what's your plan? How are you going to solve this problem? Explain your program clearly. So who's part of the program? What does it do? When is it active? Where is it active? How do you serve the community? Your who, what, when, where, how, like we learned in grade school, is an important piece here that you will need in this statement of need. And then impact. What difference is it going to make? How are things going to change? Who is it going to benefit? And how are you going to measure success? This is all super important information, because the funders want to see that you know what you're talking about, that there really is a need, and you really are the best fit to solve this need. And so that impact and that data is super important. Any questions here? I'm going to pause here for questions. If I did not answer your question, you can feel free to let me know in the chat. But I want to pause here for questions, because we are going to do a breakout activity around the statement of need, because it is one of the larger, meatier pieces of your proposal. So, okay. Yes, statement of need, case for support, yes. They are one and the same. In this sense, yes. Work already accomplished. It is super important, because you want to show that you know what you're talking about, that you've done the work, you've made impact before, but there's more to be done. So that is an important piece of your proposal. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, feel free to continue to type questions in the chat while I explain this activity, and we'll try to get to them. All right, so we are gonna do breakout rooms. I would say if we can do, Emily, like 5-ish in a room. So I would say yes, if we could do, yeah, I think 5 in a room is good for this one. Um, we are gonna give you, no worries, about 10 to 15 minutes. I'm hoping that's enough for everyone in the group to talk. But I want you to share with your breakout group, what is your largest program or organization need? And so if you have, 3 or 4 programs, but one is severely underfunded, you can talk about that. If all of your programs are doing well, but you just need more general operating funds, you can talk about that. Who's your target audience? And do you have any data that can back that up? And what kind of impact can you have with this particular need addressed? I'm gonna do my best to type these questions in the chat. And then my goal is that you are sharing with each other, learning from each other, see what other things come up organically in your conversation. And then when we come back, we'll also spend a few minutes just sharing what we learned from each other. And also, were there any pieces of this that you're like, oh, we have this missing, and this is an area that we need to work on in order to have a strong statement of need. So we'll talk about that too when we come back. But I'm going to give you 15 minutes now. We can open up the breakout rooms and then we'll close them. And you'll get a notification about a minute before they're being closed. If you're done with your conversation, you can come back in before that minute's done. But if not, once the minute's over, it'll shoot you right back to this main room with Emily and I. All right. Thank you guys again so much for being so engaging. I'm hoping this is a good conversation. I'll see you back here in a few minutes. All right. I think we have everybody back now. Awesome. Okay. So thank you guys so much for indulging in that activity. Appreciate just the engagement and the conversation. Did anybody, a few minutes here, if anybody wanted to share what they learned or any of the conversation that happened in their breakout group, anything that they wanted to share, now's the time to do it. Yes, please, Dawn. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you. I was just speaking with Emily in our breakout, and she was talking about wanting to get operational funds. And I was just saying that my experience working for a legacy newspaper is that we used to get grants that provided operational funding.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them like very deliberate in that way, and now I
It's
don't
harder.
know. It's much harder. It's
Mm-hmm.
much harder, and the documentation that's required for every grant it's
Mm-hmm.
has really changed. It seems like after the pandemic, things a lot dried up, and then the requirements is a much higher bar of what you have to do, and it becomes a part-time job, really sometimes,
Yes.
just
I absolutely.
reporting and everything else.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree with that. I think obviously, during the pandemic, a lot of organizations were just funding things left and right because of the pandemic, and they really responded to that. But you're right, after things calmed down a little bit, funding has gotten more rigorous, I would say. And also obviously the administration is changing things and folks are changing the way that they're giving. So yes, it is challenging, not impossible. It still exists. It is its own job. And so, organizations will have development departments that work on this, or they will hire consultants like myself if they don't have a whole department or can't afford a full-time person. Consultants is also another route to support in that process. But you're absolutely right. It is getting challenging, in these times for sure. But money's still out there. It is still out there. It's up for grabs. Just takes a little bit of more legwork for sure. Some said they had a really good convo. Definitely could have kept the conversations going. I love that.
Yeah, we
Topping it
had the same
Yeah.
Sorry, we had
No,
the same
please
question,
go.
and we had the same question in our group that Dominic just asked in the chat. That also came up for us.
The target audience mean the population we serve or the audience of the proposal? A good question. It was intended to mean the population that you serve.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess carrying off of that, what came up with us, like the last bit of our meeting, we were actually in the middle of it and then kind of got kicked back into this
I'm
for
so sorry.
no.
Next time we'll do 20 minutes.
uh, but it was about like kind of putting those both together in the sense that like providing um, like commentary, testimonial, uh,
Mhm.
feedback from our target audience is kind of something that is like important for the funders themselves. Well,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think testimonials are an awesome tool to use in your proposal. And I think um, even though the question was intended your target your audience who you serve, there's similarity in the funder, right? Because they're also wanting to serve um, probably those target audiences too, if they're a good fit. And so if you're working in the Chicago area and there's funders that are only funding in Chicago, then you have the same target audience there. Any other questions, comments, things you want to share that went on in your groups? We have time for one or two more.
I'll just jump in and be the person that just names, and this will probably come up at some point, but that for many of us who have received federal funds,
Mhm.
um, when you talk about impact, for instance, one of the folks in my group, is supporting Black newsrooms and people of color telling stories about their own communities and Black journalists. My group is a civil rights group and has been for 50 plus years. There's no way you can talk about either one of those impacts or outcomes that you want to see
Mhm.
that you were pitching to get funding for
Federally.
without crossing that DEI line
Yep.
that's been drawn in public discourse. So that's
Yes.
just a really difficult moment we have in terms of trying to talk about our work um, in general.
Yes, I will say, I absolutely. What I have told clients, in working, because like I mentioned right off the bat of this conversation, right? The work that I do with nonprofits are usually led by and for people of color. As a woman of color myself, this work is really important to me. And this is unfortunately the reality of the state of how things are today. So what I've recommended is one, shifting your gears to foundation grants. And also, as a development consultant, one of the first things that I tell nonprofits is that you need to have a diverse funding portfolio. You should not have 80% of your funding be just from federal grants or 80% of your funding being from one or two foundations. You want to diversify your funding pool so that, God forbid something, is withdrawn or not funded anymore, you still have enough pot to sustain your organization. Sustainability is key and diverse funding is a big piece of that. The other thing that I will mention is that for those of us, this is not everybody, because I know we're from all over the states here, is that if you are in a state that is more liberal, like Chicago, like the state of Illinois or Chicagoland area, um, there are foundations who are even just digging in deeper with the DEI work because it's so important to them that they're continuing to fund that. And so at the city level, there are still grants out there that will support work for racial equity. So, I tend to be more optimistic. So there's a, a piece of the puzzle that we can count on. But yeah, the diverse funding portfolio is going to be really, really key during these times. But thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. And that definitely is something, that needs to get talked about. All right, cool. So we are going to move on to different sections. Again, if more questions, comments come up, feel free to use the chat. But there are more sections of the proposal that I want to share with you all when you are writing so that you know the different areas that you need to be addressing to have a strong proposal. So our next one is the program description section. And so this one is where if you are applying for specific program grants, this is the section for you. If it's organizational funding, then you'll kind of bucket all of your programs in here and just more about your organization background and history. But in here, if you're writing for a specific program, you want to talk about what is it that you're proposing to do? Is it a new program? Is it an existing program that you just want to make sure, continues its sustainability? The goals, objectives, and timelines. I always recommend using SMART goals, that acronym SMART. So they're specific, measurable, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. I'm like, how do you spell smart? Attainable, relevant, and time bound. And so you want to make sure that that they have all those aspects to them. And is it a 1-year grant? Is it a 2-year grant? What is the timeline to achieving these goals that you put there? And the activities that will help you to achieve the grant, to achieve the goal. So if your goal is to increase graduation rates, what activities are you doing to help achieve that? Are you doing tutoring? Are you doing extracurricular activities? What are those activities? I recommend putting those in a logic model, and I will give you templates for a logic model after this. We'll do a little screenshot of one. And why this particular strategy? Is there any data or research that can back up your framework? Next is organizational capacity. This can be a little bit challenging. Full transparency, it can be a little bit challenging for newer nonprofits because you need some time to get your feet off the ground and prove that you have the capacity to do this. But basically, the key elements of this section are why your organization, what makes you unique and an expert in this area. What are your experiences and success stories that you can share? I love the power of storytelling, and this is your opportunity to do that in this section. We talked about the testimonials that can be included in here as well as a couple of different sections throughout. Your staff qualifications, I call this the management plan. So who specifically is going to lead the work should this grant get awarded? If it's a new program, are you hiring out? Or if it's not, do you have the existing staff who have the capacity to continue to do the work that you're saying is going to be implemented? So what is that management plan? Sometimes you'll include resumes in here as well, and short bios for who's going to be leading the work. And are there partnerships that you can include in here? And do you have the trust of the community? And who are those partners? A lot of funders do love partnerships. They love collaborations because the more people doing the work, the more impact that you can have. So those are key elements that are included in this particular section for organizational capacity. You want to make sure you have a section on outcomes and evaluations. Like I mentioned before, if it's a foundation that just has an application, like just questions, and they're not requiring a 5 or 10-page narrative, you still will find a question on outcomes and evaluation. And so that's why it's important to understand what that means for folks. So some key elements in here is, what does success look like? So define clear and measurable outcomes. So by the end of this grant, we are going to have, 100 students graduate, or 80%. And I keep using academic because that's primarily where I come from, but I've worked a lot with arts nonprofits too, so that can look different. And data collection tools. Are you working with an external evaluator? Are you collecting the data yourself? Are you going to have satisfaction surveys or pre and post assessment surveys? What is that going to look like? And how are you going to evaluate that? What's your evaluation plan? For larger grants, this piece is important. It can feel complex, but it is an important piece because funders will require annual report or sometimes even quarterly reports on the progress of the grant. And so you want to make sure that you're having all the data you can to report out on that. Good question. Do you need to submit documentation for partnerships and collaborations? Yes and no. And so I've seen proposals do both. If you have existing partnerships, you can include MOUs. So MOUs are memorandums of understanding or letters of support that an organization agrees to partner with you and to support this grant should it be awarded. If you're on a tight timeline and maybe you've listed 5 partners, but you only had a chance to get 3 support letters or MOUs in place, you can put in the proposal that you are in discussion with 2 more external partners. And so I've seen both, but the strongest proposals already have those MOUs in place, and that can be submitted as supplemental documentation. Good question. The budget. You want to make sure, and this is where I mentioned before, errors can happen very easily. I've done them as a consultant in my 10 plus years writing grants and in the consulting business. Some organizations will like your proposal and be like, hey, I just noticed this, small discrepancy. Can you clarify? And I've had that too, which is great. But then there are some, if you're a brand new funder and you make an error, they won't even consider you because they just don't have the time. There's too many applications. So you want to make sure that your budget aligns with your narrative. Sometimes you put things in your Excel budget and you put things in your narrative and the numbers don't add up. So you want to make sure that there's alignment there. You want to be specific and realistic, include all relevant costs that you can think of. And again, some common pitfalls are math errors or inconsistencies or under budgeting. So you want to make sure that you try to avoid that when you do this section. Proposals will require a budget and a budget narrative as well sometimes. So you'll need the Excel one, and then you'll need the narrative explaining why the number and what it's going to. Okay, so those are the key elements of the proposal I wanted to discuss that you'll see throughout many different types of applications. Sometimes there's more and sometimes there's less, but those are foundational sections that you need to be aware of. So for eligibility and readiness, like you've done the research, you have some funders, you've got some of these sections already ready to go. How do you know? You want to make sure that you're ready to submit these grants. They are going to ask, some foundations, not all, will ask for this paperwork. And so you want to make sure that you have it ready to go. So your IRS determination letter, prove that you are a 501c3 nonprofit. Sometimes they'll ask for the annual report to Secretary of State. They almost always, not always, but almost will ask for audited financials and an operating budget. Depending on the size of your organization, you could submit letters that maybe you're not required to do X, Y, and Z. If you have, an accounting person that you can work with, this is the area to do that. And other documents that you want to make sure you have on hand are your program descriptions, a program calendar, your impact report. If you have an annual impact report that you put online, that's super helpful. And again, any key staff resumes or CVs when you need to submit on capacity or your management plan. No worries. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, again, please put them in the chat. So some secrets to grant success. You want to make sure, I've said this a few times throughout, you want to follow the directions that are on the RFP. Continue to read and reread what's in the RFP so that you know everything that's required of you for your proposal. Answer only the questions asked. Avoid jargon. Don't make it hard to read or just overly rigorous or ambitious. Yes, the recording will be shared. And you also want to call or email the program officers, but in a timely manner. You never want to do that on the application due date. So I mentioned before, find the contact information for anyone. Usually it's a program officer in the department that you're in the funding bucket that you're looking for, and send them an email. Say, hey, I'm X, Y, and Z. This is my organization. We're interested in applying for this grant. I have some questions. Could we meet? Or maybe they just want questions via email. Not all funders will have the time or the capacity to meet with you, but they will answer emails, and some will. And so it's always worth just shooting your shot and sending that email, because this is all about cultivating new funding partners. And so that relationship building is key. I don't recommend, we do it all the time, but if you can avoid submitting cold applications, meaning you don't know anybody there, you've never talked to anybody there, you want to heighten your chances. And so it's important to try to get a face in front of the funder as soon as you can. Again, make sure that your budget and budget explanations support the narrative. You want to include high quality work samples if you have them. A lot of arts nonprofits will ask for videos or photos. So you want to make sure that you include those as well. If you are a team of folks, whether you're in a development department or you're just, all hands on deck kind of nonprofit, I use Google Docs as a shared document to outline the proposal in the application. I think this is a great way to divide and conquer the work while we all live see any changes or updates made. And that way, because it's on a cloud, you don't lose your proposal. You would hate to lose any information because of a computer crash. And then something that I found, within the last few years that tends to be really successful is to brand your proposal. If they're asking for This is if it's not an application question in a portal, but they're asking for paperwork, like uploaded documents or narratives. It's awesome to be able to put your logo on it in the header, like have a nice header, have a footer, include different images and graphics and tables, and just make it yours, right? You want to brand it with your organization, because it looks good, and I think folks like that. And because I said we would talk about it, you could have a whole training on AI for grant writing, and this is not it, but I do want to make sure that we address some of it. There are benefits to using ChatGPT or AI for grant writing. Benefits are you can get a first draft of your grant very quickly, within seconds, if you input all the things that you need. It can help you with your clarity and just the tone that you're looking for. It can also help to create tools and tables and things of that nature. So it is a great tool. But it is a tool. It is not a substitute for you as a person and a grant writer. You always want to make sure that you fact check your numbers and your claims. I can tell you from experience and from the workshops that I've participated in that they don't always come back with accurate information. And so you want to make sure that you are always fact checking. You do not rely on it as the be all for the information that you need. And yes, I'm going to answer that question in a second. And you want to make sure that you personalize it with your tone and voice. The more that you use it, the more it recognizes your tone. But you want to make sure that, again, that it avoids the jargon, it doesn't overcomplicate things, and then make sure that it aligns with your values and your community voice. The best way to use it is to just dump as much information in ChatGPT or AI as you can about what you need. Be so specific. And then that will help get you the information that you need. But I just want to caution that it is not a substitute for you as a grant writer, as a development director, as an executive director. It's not a substitute for me as a consultant. It is a tool. But if you are new to the grant writing space, I would caution even more using AI. Because there's just a lot of information that you need to have as background in order. It only gives you back what you feed it. And so if you don't know all the things to feed it, it's not going to give you what you need. Can a nonprofit without a 501c3 land a grant? If you have a fiscal sponsor, yes. So there are many small nonprofits who are still working with the paperwork to get their 501c3 status, but you're doing the work, right? And so all you need is a fiscal sponsor. So that's another organization that already has a 501c3 that you can sit under their umbrella. And you can apply for grants through them. And so they will receive the money and funnel it through you, to you. And some fiscal sponsors will work out an agreement with you that maybe they get, 5-10% of whatever grant funding or funding that comes through if it's unrestricted. But you can use a fiscal sponsor for that. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before we move on to the tools? We're almost there. Okay. Hypothetically, online for grant writing work for starting nonprofits as well. No, yeah, this absolutely works for starting nonprofits for sure. I would say it's definitely built for a new nonprofit. Good question. So I am not with Forefront. I am, I have my own consulting company, Propel Consulting, but I'm a member of ACN that works with Forefront, and so that's my connection with them. But Emily is with Forefront, so she can answer all Forefront questions. Okay, so some grant tools, and you can keep the questions coming. I love tools. As a consultant, I have developed and used tools, and I share the tools with the nonprofits that I work with, because for me personally, sustainability is key. And so tools will help you to have what you need to keep the work going. So I always tell my clients, I'm going to give you all these tools. I will develop new tools for you. We'll do the work. We'll write the grants. But after our time together is complete, my hope is that you have enough tools to keep the work going. And so some of that will include a grant calendar tracker that I will show you here in a minute, a basic grant proposal outline. So just here are the sections that you need for a grant, and you fill it in. This will look different. What I'm going to give you today is very, very basic. very, very high level. When I work with nonprofit clients, I will get more specific, obviously, for their organization and do a data dump and write narrative, the basic narrative that they can use and reuse. You're also going to get today, though, a funder fit worksheet. So just some questions that you want to ask to make sure that they're a fit. A grant readiness checklist is good. Sample budget template, grant terms cheat sheet, and a logic model template. So these are some of the tools that are important to have and that you will be getting via email later today. Good question. As a consultant with a particular organization, oh, my question went away. Hold on. Sorry, gotta scroll up. I typically, when I work with clients, we do multiple grants together. So personally, I work with retainer packages. So we have a 3-month package where we'll do as many grants as we can fit into that, and also provide a basic proposal template that they can adjust as needed. So it's usually multiple grants at a time. So this is what I talked about. I'm going to try to zoom in. Let's see, here we go. So this right here is a sample of a logic model that was used for a grant that was awarded. And logic models, I think, are great tools to have. Not all funders will require a logic model. You'll see this more with government type grants or federal state grants still ask for logic models. But I think they're a great tool to have, whether the grant asks for it or not, because it's a way to organize what your goals and outcomes are per program. And so you have your initial input. So what do you as an organization bring to the table? And then I like the number 3. So I always recommend 3 goals, 3 activities per goal, and then your short, medium, and long-term outcomes for that. So you can see that here. And again, you're going to get a template that looks just like this, different colors, but you'll get a template. And then here is a template for a grant calendar or tracker. I have different templates that I've used. This is a basic one. You can find some of these online, but again, we're providing a template for you. But essentially, this is an opportunity to keep track of all the grants you are finding and that you want to apply for. So the grant name, the funding organization, what's the deadline, how much are they funding, who's the contact person, here are some important links, due dates, etc. This is a way to help project manage and keep everything on track. I want to talk quickly. I think this is the last thing, and then we'll have some time for questions. We talked about this a little bit, but this grant writing is not a one-person thing. You need a team. And for smaller nonprofits, I totally understand how difficult that can be. And so you might need some volunteers or some folks to help bounce things off of, but it'll be really difficult if you're just a one person applying and you're the only one rereading, you're the only one copywriting and editing, and the only one submitting. That can get overwhelming very quick. And it's not sustainable. And so you want to try and get a team. And what I recommend is a lead grant writer, whether that's someone that serves in your development team or that's you as the executive director, or you hire a consultant grant writer. They can be your lead grant writer that will help create the outlines, get the sections, finalize the drafts, etc. You want to make sure you have someone on accounting or your finance team to help oversee your budget. They're just good with Excel. They're good with formulas. They understand the finances of the organization. And so they can help with that. If you need someone for a new program, like you're writing a grant for a new program, your grant coordinator, whoever's going to help lead that program, is also a good person to have on your team for grant writing. I say that because I have I've led grants that I did not help write. And when it was my job to then implement it, there was like things that people wrote in there that I was like, this doesn't make any sense. They shouldn't have written this in there. It's not sustainable, or we don't have the capacity to do it, etc. So it's just nice to have whoever's going to lead the grant also help write it, because they can kind of help be your reality check in terms of what is sustainable and doable. And then your subject matter expert. So if you were to hire me as a grant writer and you're doing work in mental health, I'm not a psychologist, sociologist. I'm not any of those things. And so I would need a subject matter expert to share with me and give me kind of a data dump of all the things that they're doing so that I can then translate that into a narrative. And so it's important that whether you're hiring a consultant or you're working as a team, again, whoever is helping to lead the work, who's knowledgeable about the program, that you also include them in the process, in the grant writing process. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to write all these sections, but it definitely means that they're sharing their thoughts, inputs, and reviewing it with you and for you. All right. Any questions? Let me open up my chat, but you are also welcome to come off mute at this time. Yes, Angela.
You just made me think about something. We operate as a statewide agency, and we often try to encourage communities to write in for grants for early childhood programming, but they don't often have grant writers or help, know anyone in the neighborhood that's a grant writer. What do you suggest for that one, if you happen to know of resources? And also, do you also provide those types of resources to, organizations or communities on more of a systems building level?
Yes. So as a consultant, I definitely do a lot of like strategy and systems building work for smaller and newer nonprofits who just need to get their foot in the door. So yes, but also the resources piece is key. So Forefront is a great resource in terms of helping to find consultants, as well as ACN, the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. Has a listserv of consultants, and nonprofits can submit an RFP on there saying, hey, I need a consultant for this. And as a consultant, we get an email and we write our proposals and we submit so that the nonprofit can choose a consultant if they don't know anyone. Another great one is called AMPT, AMPT. It's AMPT Advancing Nonprofits. They also have a very large database of consultants that nonprofits can choose from. And also, I particularly love them because they help stand in the gap for smaller nonprofits who can't afford consultants. So they will actually pay for a consultant on the nonprofit's behalf. There's obviously some steps that the nonprofit has to go through. So they have to meet with the folks. They have to meet certain requirements. They have to be under $2 million budget, led by someone of color in the south and west sides of Chicago. So there's a local-based organization that can help partner nonprofits with consultants if they don't know anyone.
Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome question from Anna about quantitative data. Yes, funders absolutely do want to see that. Strategies or tools to recommend to develop quantitative KPIs. So if you are totally new to developing KPIs or just getting data, AI can be a good tool for that. You can, do a data dump, like I have this program, I have these many people I'm serving. What's a good, goal or outcome I can include in here. So that's a tool that you can use that I've used before. I think working with consultants who are also good at evaluating programs, they can help help you to understand what's a good KPI. They would do something that I would also do as a consultant is we'd have an assessment phase. And so they would work with a nonprofit and just, again, that first like month or so together is just understanding the program, getting the data that you do have, having interviews with staff, et cetera, to help develop what those goals should be for a grant proposal. But yeah, it is important piece of the founder requirements. But yeah, evaluators are the one. Any other, sorry, I gotta scroll. Awesome. So when you're gonna develop achievable goals, and I'm saying this as someone with an academic background, you want to have baseline data first. So, for example, I had thrown out that 100 students, right? My baseline would have been like, but how many are graduating right now? If it's 80 and all I need to do is bring it up to 20, I think that could be achievable. And so understanding your baseline data is going to be helpful in trying to establish what achievable goals can look like. If you do not have any baseline data, try to collect it before proposal, whatever, how many people you serve, where your programs are at, just as much information as you can. Again, a consultant is good for this as well. So collecting that and then making sure you're conservative with those goals too. Super conservative because you want to make sure that you can achieve them. I hope that answers that question. Sure thing. Any other questions? And Emily's also sharing some really good tools in the chat, so hopefully you guys are seeing those links. Good question. I love Los Angeles, so unfortunately, I am not familiar with anyone like Amped in the Los Angeles area. I don't know if anybody else on here, again, we're all room of experts, knows of organizations like Amped. I think they're really unique. They're actually a really young organization here in the Chicagoland area, so I don't think a lot of folks are doing that work quite yet. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but um, if you have some funding, because Amped is really the one that provides funding, but if you do have some funding, those listservs of consultants might be a good bet. But if I hear of any, I'm happy to send that out. Any other questions? I have, obviously, my contact information is on the screen, so I am more than happy to answer any questions that come at any point in time. Please feel free to reach out if you do have questions or if you're in need of services or referrals even. I'm happy to offer some referrals and share again with you some of those resources we talked about today. Again, Emily will send out the link. It's just a one page with the links of all the tools you're going to get. So the logic models, the grant calendar template, the checklist, all those. I think there's about 7 tools on there that you will receive via email after this. I'll hang out for a few minutes, but if there are no other questions, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful that you were here to learn about this, and I'm wishing you all the best of luck in your grant sourcing, grant finding journey.